do that. Oh my goodness! So I just gotta point this. You can't make this up. So I'm like, hey, streams up, and I'm voting on some social media like Facebook, and I see this. This is like, tag that you're voting for the 2021 Canadian federal election. I'm like, dude, the whole point of this stream is so we don't have to think about that. Anyway. I just thought that was funny and I wanted to show that to you. Because I thought that was like humorous, and just like, thanks. Okay. I totally almost did it. I almost did it again. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Pod. Wow, to the Streaming Parson Podcast. I really gotta come up with a better name if I'm not gonna tongue twist myself like that. Streaming Parson Podcast, episode 3. And today is a weird day. Today I'm just gonna tell you some silly stories, most of them about like silly stuff that happened in my life. in more recent times. And the real point of today's stream is just to get our minds off the Canadian federal election right now, because that's going on, and I would go upstairs for a couple of minutes because my computer's obviously in the basement. You can tell by the window in the background where the light is coming from. It kind of makes it really awkward, but that's besides the point. But basically, I would go upstairs. Sorry, my cat is here too, and she's gonna do that a lot now that the weather's getting colder. But anyway, I went upstairs, do some stuff, get food, whatever, right? My parents are glued to the TV, just watching like all the election coverage stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna do, not gonna do that. So today we're just gonna have a much more relaxed day. And the last couple of weeks when we did this podcast, we, had much more contentful conversation about knowledge and wisdom and stuff like that, right? And today I'm like, nah, man, I'm gonna go to the other end of how these podcasts will sometimes go down, right? And sometimes they're gonna be silly, like today's stream. Today's podcast is gonna be kind of just a strange day, just for us to screw around, have a laugh, mainly at me, and just have our minds kind of be clear at times, right? Because one of the things about like humor, storytelling, and just times where we can have kind of silly discussions or silly conversation topics and whatever. The idea is that we as people need that ability to unwind. Otherwise, you would just go insane, right? You would just go berserk. You would lose your mind, basically, right? If your mind was not allowed to find rest, from all the crazy, stressful things that we do in this world. So, today's gonna be a lot more relaxed today, and I'm just gonna tell you some silly stories, mostly about myself. And so that's gonna be how the stream goes down today. So welcome to Silly Stories with the Streaming Parson, I guess. Now, the first one I want to kind of do is something I've never actually done. Even though I've had the Streaming Parson channel for like a couple of years, actually. The YouTube one has been just over a year. Or actually about just under. When did I start the Streaming Parson channel on YouTube? It was like... It's been almost a year. I don't remember. I should probably look it up. Let's go check out when I started doing stuff on this channel. I can actually check by the first video I did here. So, content. I very well remember that my very first video was a live stream. So, let's do that. Let's take a quick look, actually. How long has this channel been around? The very first video I did, and I never bothered to actually like do like a year anniversary thing or anything like that for this channel. But the very first stream I did on the YouTube channel was actually September 7th of 2020. So actually, we've made it over a year. I've been doing this for over a year now. Wow, it's weird to think that much time is right. I mean, time just goes fast, and I've already had this whole funny thing about talking about how time is weird in the last podcast. You guys should definitely check out the other podcast. But yeah, it's been over a year, and that's weird to think, right? That I've been doing this for that long already. But in that whole year time, plus when I used to be on Twitch, I never actually sat down and talked about where I actually got the name the Streaming Parson from. So today I'm gonna tell you the gist of that story. It's not a it's not like a fantastic, amazing story or anything like that. It's just kind of just telling you where I got the inspiration for the name. And so when I started out on Twitch, and the idea was a very weird idea. Similar, I mean, I still kind of do it now, but Twitch was the environment is very different, and it's harder to do what my original plan was. So the idea was, I would it would be more of a podcast style, but I would still play games in the background. Like I would be doing something while having conversations with people. That was kind of the point of how I did the Twitch stream. But the problem was, hopefully there's no like Twitch agents here to like stab at me or something, because I'm gonna stab at them. And the problem with Twitch is that Twitch is very unforgiving in regards to how you do your content, and if it lines up with what Twitch, you know, permits. And of course, the big problem, and everyone talks about like one of the big problems of Twitch is the quote unquote um, Twitch is moderated by a bunch of simps. Is kind of the whole joke about it, and you know, you can I can believe that because like you have people, women borderlining like pornographic um, content, being very lewd. I think is a much more safe way of putting it. Women being very lewd on camera, and then you have some guy, some old Asian guy, read the Bible to you, right? Of course, what are people gonna watch, right? And so there was that, and of course there were people who would just like Twitch had way more trolls. I mean, you guys have seen even on YouTube, I get a number of trolls, right? But Twitch was way worse when it came to the trolling. For a guy who just wants to, for a guy just reading the Bible on camera. Hey, Amer, welcome. Just stopping by. Well, thanks for stopping by and saying hello. But anyway, so with the toxic environment in Twitch and extremely hostile toward, like it's weird to think, it's extremely hostile toward a guy just reading the Bible on camera, right? I guess maybe I should have had a hot girl do it for me or something instead of me doing it, right? But that's nefarious though. I wouldn't do that. That would be awful. But basically, the idea was, to be this, and I still do it to this day, right? With the Bible reading streams, and we do studies on here, on camera, right? The idea came from a frustration I had. As you guys know, I am actually by technicality, I guess you could say, I am a pastor. I have the whole degree thing to say that yes, you are a pastor. I have a certificate that says yes, you are a pastor of the Evangelical Free Church of Canada. So yeah, you're a pastor, right? But I've always had trouble I've been having trouble for the longest time finding actual pastoral work. And so it can be pretty crushing at times, right? You go from applying from place to place, and no churches would take you, and everyone some people are really cynical toward churches because of this kind of problem. And so it's I hate to say this, but like people look at my life and then they go like, well, why would I bother with churches when they can't even treat their own pastors nicely and don't even give any relative justice in that regard, right? Like how can people trust a church that's so stuck in its ways? One, and two, you run into a lot of quote unquote old guys, you know, greedy for maintaining power, right? Instead of letting young guys get a shot. And one of the things that like I'm not the only one who suffers from this problem. There's lots of other young pastors that suffer from the same problem as I do. And so I was like, well, what? How am I supposed to, like, there's that burning passion in me to, like, spread the word, spread the gospel, whatever. And of course, I did volunteering in, like, the Vancouver slums, or the downtown east side, as it's known as. Basically, it's the slums, the Vancouver version. So I did, like, volunteering there and did some ministry there, and then that also fell through. So not even just pastoral work wasn't working out, but also other ministry outlets and parachurch organizations. So if a parachurch organization is basically a Christian organization that works to serve the community, but it is not labeled as a church, right? So, like, the place I would volunteer at, it was called Union Gospel Mission. You may have heard of it. They do a lot of stuff with, feeding people in the Vancouver downtown east side, and, helping people with alcohol and drug addiction, right? They have a recovery program there and stuff like that, right? But it is not a church, right? It's an outreach. It's a recovery. It's actually a recovery place. That's its real purpose, right? Even though it's more known for, like, giving out meals and stuff like that, because that's what they do more of, for obvious reasons, right? They do more of that, even though its real purpose is actually to help people with addiction. And so their motto is, fighting poverty in the Vancouver downtown east side by overcoming addiction one person at a time. That's kind of its motto, right? Something like that. If there's an actual Union Gospel Mission person here to actually state the actual statement, please do. But I'm paraphrasing the kind of mission statement of UGM, and but it's not a church, right? It's a Christian organization that helps people, but its primary function is about helping people with addiction issues, and it's a recovery, alcohol and drug recovery place. And even places like that, like, me trying to find work as a pastor was just not going through it. So what ended up happening was that I would take up a more, regular job, I had different jobs, mainly for the longest time, actually, after I had finished working as a pastor at one place. Well, I was an intern. I was an intern pastor. So basically, the guy who gets paid really low amount and then always gets stuck with the youth ministry. That's a pastoral intern in a nutshell. And so I did that. I did that, like, basically right after I graduated from seminary, which was like, wow, it's so weird to think about this. But, like, it was like over 4 years ago that I finished seminary, and then for a year after that, I had worked in a church as a pastoral intern. But of course, that's not a sustainable, job, right? So after that happened, I looked for work for a while, and then I ended up becoming a security guard. And going back into a more normal job, quote unquote, I still wanted to do missionary work. Of course, there's the funny story I will tell you after that. It's kind of ironic. Being a security guard actually worked in conflict with being a pastor, in a weird way and in a sad way. But I'll still tell the story if you guys are interested in it, or kind of explain what happened. But basically, working as a security guard, I was no longer directly involved in ministry, and so I was thinking about, like, how could I still do ministry, right? How could I still tell people about the gospel as a pastor should, and do pastoral counseling, help people and stuff like that, right? In their spiritual lives. And so, but then, I came with this idea. I was like, hey, why don't I just do, like, online videos? Like, yeah, I know videos on YouTube and stuff exist, but no one really does more, how do I put it? A more regular kind of general chat discussion type outreach on YouTube. Like, there are some channels that exist, but they're much more formalized. I want to do something that's more like, hey, why don't I just like talk to people online on the YouTube platform about the gospel? Why don't I just do that? And so I wanted to do that, so I came up with like the stream setup as you see here, you know, with the camera and the microphone and everything. And then I was like, all right, what should I call myself? Now, part of this was a spite, to be honest. And I know now that I'm going to tell you this, some people will be like, well, now you're just being a jackass, Michael. But, I mean, people already thought that, so what else is new? But anyway, so the name Parson, not the streaming part's kind of obvious. The Parson part comes from a story or a poem, but I'm going to refer to it as a story. The story called The Canterbury Tales. And if you don't know what the Canterbury Tales is, you are missing out, my friend. It is something you should definitely check out. Go to a library and borrow this book. Read this book. It's a great book. It's not that long, actually. The funny thing was I was originally going to read it on stream, but I can't seem to find my copy, which is terrible. I'm here telling you, like, you should read this book, and then I can't find my own copy of it. But even if I were to do, like, an online read, I would still encourage you to read it. It's a great book. And the Canterbury Tales basically goes down like this. So, there's this dude, the narrator, assumed to be Geoffrey Chaucer, as that is the author of the poem. Like, dude named Geoffrey Chaucer. And basically, he's going on a pilgrimage to, as the title implies, Canterbury, the Church of Canterbury. And so, on this pilgrimage, there's a whole bunch of people, and they're going to go travel together. And part of the whole shtick is they all tell stories to each other as they're on this journey. And so, when you read the poem or the book, whatever you want to call it, I know all the English lit experts will say, well, it's technically always been defined as a poem, the poem of the Canterbury Tales. But, you know, as a modern person, we're just going to refer to it as a book, okay? So, throughout the book, these various people that Chaucer travels with, and there's like a whole bunch of colorful characters, you know, you got a knight, you got his squire, you got, you know, a bunch of merchants, and of course, when you're going to a pilgrimage to a church, no doubt you're going to have some religious people, right? So, at the beginning of the poem, Chaucer kind of introduces everybody. He introduces all the different characters. And so, some things he's, you know, to the knight, he talks about, oh, you know, this is, you know, a standard knight, you know, pretty wealthy, nobleman, you know. He's got sick-ass looking sword there and all that stuff, the way you would talk about a knight. And then you talk about merchants, you know, look at these guys. You can tell they're successful in their merchant jobs because they got some nice clothes, you know, stuff like that. But then when Chaucer gets to the religious guys, oh man, he has a heyday with these guys, right? Like some of them, he talks about like how there's a friar there, and the friar, despite the fact he's supposed to be like a holy man, he's kind of like similar to Friar Tuck in Robin Hood, where despite the fact that, oh, you expect a monk to be like a recluse, kind of like living in a monastery, you can tell this guy's like an outdoorsman, right? And so like the monk is a little rugged looking, he's, you know, a bigger guy and all that, right? And obviously Friar Tuck was based on this guy. You know, he's an outdoorsman. So he's not exactly what he seems. And then of course you have the priest, and the priest is kind of like the symbol of what people kind of are wary about with Christians. Is like, oh, you know, like he's supposed to be a holy man, but there's some things about him that are a little questionable, right? And then, oh man, there's these two guys, and they're like, Chaucer has nothing good to say about these guys, right? You have the summoner, who would be like, well, back then, you know, since everything was Christianized, right? The courtroom had the summoner, and the summoner would be like, well, basically a bailiff, right? in modern courts today. And so the summoner, Chaucer just chews them out for being like, man, the summoner is like super corrupt. And then there's like another religious guy. I can't remember what his name was, but he was also very corrupt. And so there's quite a few people within the clergy that were very, very corrupt. And Chaucer has no problem just chewing these guys out, right? And telling us how corrupt these guys are. After Chaucer goes through a couple of these colorful characters, the last person that Chaucer talks about in his introduction to all the people on the pilgrimage, the last guy is a parson. Now, if you don't know what that word means, I've been throwing this word around, a parson is basically just a very general term of a church worker. So, by definition, the pastor is a parson. The worship team are parsons, right? The church janitor is a parson. And so the parson is just a word used to say, like, well, anyone who works in the church is a parson. And so the last guy Chaucer is talking about he introduces is a dude called the parson. And the parson, he seems like he's just some guy, right? He's actually got a really crappy job. And what the parson's job is essentially he digs ditches. But if you know the context of the poem, this is shortly before the Black Plague really hit people, right? And it really started sweeping through and killing lots of people, right? Because the Black Plague killed basically a quarter of England's population at the time. And so the parson, when he was digging ditches, his actual job was that he was prepping. He's basically just prepping a whole bunch of graves, right? Because people would die left and right in general, right? So his job is basically like to prepare people's burials, essentially, right? Not exactly a sexy job, right? Like nothing is more sexy than when a girl goes, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a morticianist," right? Like, yeah, that really turns the girls on, right? Telling a girl you're a morticianist, but a morticianist, an easier way to explain, an easier word is an embalmer, right? Person who preps the dead, right? And so, yeah, nothing sexier than telling a girl you're a morticianist or an embalmer. But basically, that was what the parson did, right? He was the guy who prepped graves, and so, he's got a crappy job. Clearly, not married, because no girl would date a guy who has that crappy job. But then Chaucer goes on to kind of talk about a little bit of this guy's life, right? And the parson is an interesting character. Even though he works this crappy job, he's very studious. He loves to read, gets his hand on whatever he can. He's very well read, and he's very generous. That's why he's so poor, right? Because unlike the priest, the thing where it implies the priest is kind of corrupt is that the priest, he's a lot better dressed than a priest should be, kind of thing. The idea that, Christian, just taking money, using too much of the church funds for themselves, kind of thing, right? That was kind of the thing with the priest. But with the parson, he's quite the opposite. He's very poor, because he's always being very generous, and he's basically, the way Chaucer explains this character, the parson, is that the parson is like this upright, the ideal Christian. And so, at the time, I liked, I mean, to be fair, every Christian likes to think they're the ideal Christian, right? But I kind of related myself to the parson character, especially, like, he had the crappy job and I was working security, which is not a fun job. And, at the time, meeting women was very hard for a guy and it still is for a guy my age. But, I would make the joke, it's like, yeah, telling a girl nowadays that you're a security guard is almost the same as telling them you're a morticianist. Like, it's frowned upon if you're a security guard, right? Like, the security guard is like, how do I put it? I was making this joke when I play World of Warcraft. It's like the paladin class. I guess it's a reason why I would play a paladin in World of Warcraft too. Fits my religious personality. But like, everybody's happy to have the paladin in the group, but nobody ever wants to play one. And so in the same way, like with a security guard, you know, you're happy that they can do their job and quote unquote protect people, but at the same time, nobody really likes them because they're kind of assholes, right? That's kind of the impression everyone has of security guards, right? And so in the same way, you know, I kind of related to the parson in the Canterbury Tales because, you know, like I work this unsexy job, you know, I'm not exactly super rich, right? Because I heard the funniest thing, and I'll tell you this story later. I heard the funniest thing. At least I thought it was funny. Some of you might think like, well, yeah, it's actually my case is sad, whereas I think the opposite is funny. But anyway, you know, I'm basically like a bottom of the bucket guy, right? I'm someone who would be technically frowned upon in society because I'm a security guard, or I was, and stuff like that, right? And so, but at the same time, I like to believe that, like, you know, I was telling people about Jesus. I'm very firm in my convictions, and you know, as you guys know, you guys watch this channel, and you guys know that I have no shame in talking about those things, and I'm very upfront about it, right? And so, because of course, you know, I believe for the ultimate of your good, right? And that you can be a new person in Christ, right? That's ultimately for your good. And I really believe that. That's why I keep talking about it. But you know, like the parson, you know, I like to think that by doing that, I am being an upright and idealist Christian, right? That's what I like to think. And so I really resonated with this character, the parson. And so I was like, you know what? That's what I'm gonna call myself. I'm gonna call myself the Streaming Parson because I like to see myself as that dude, you know, the parson in the Canterbury Tales, you know, in the 21st century. That's who I am, right? And so that's where I got the name. Maybe one day when I maybe have to buy a new book, I really don't want to. I wish I could find mine version of the Canterbury Tales. I'll read it to you. I'll read the part. I'll read the Parson's story during the pilgrimage because his is pretty amazing. He's such a great character. I mean, he's supposed to be a great character, right? He's the quote unquote ideal Christian, right? He's the guy that a Christian should be. And I like to, you know, I relate to the character quite a bit. I mean, everybody likes to think they do, but it's like how in the book of Revelations, everybody wishes they were the Church of Philadelphia, but that's not necessarily, you know, that's obviously not the case. So, but anyway, that is how I picked the name the Streaming Parson. So that's something on the to-do list is to read the Canterbury Tales for you guys. Maybe we'll take a break, like in the future, we'll take a break from like a Bible study and just read some of the Canterbury Tales. Because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but like read some of it and for sure read the Parson's Tale because that dude's amazing. So, I mean, like how much I like the guy himself, right, is kind of a testament to like, yeah, I relate to the guy too. So there you go. There's your definitive statement of where I got my name. That's where I got the name, the Streaming Parson. All right. So, segue to another funny story. At least I think it's funny. You're gonna think it's really sad, but I think it's funny. So the other day, I was playing World of Warcraft with some people online, you know, whatever, right? And apparently I met a guy there. He was a security guard in like some place in I can't remember what state. It's not one of the southern states. It's one of those like, you know, interior states. What do you technically class those as, right? Like, you know, one of those central states, right? In the U.S. And he was talking about how like, you know, he had some funny stories about like loss prevention. So loss prevention is the security guard usually at like a mall or something, and their whole shtick is, well, as the name implies, they prevent theft, right? And so that's what loss prevention is supposed to be, right? So anyway, I was talking to this guy, and he was a loss prevention officer, as I used to be one. And we were talking about it, and we were talking about like, as every security, people frown upon us as security guards. But then he talked about how the pay is actually pretty good, and I asked him, well, how much do you get paid? And he straight up told me his salary, like how much he makes in a year. And when he told me how much he made in a year, I was blown away. I'm like, dude, I don't even make half that much when I was a security guard. Because he was talking like he made like $60,000 American a year, which is actually quite a bit for security work. That's actually quite a bit of money. $60,000 American a year is actually quite a lot. That's almost $100,000 Canadian. I live in Canada, so when I hear that a guy's making 60,000 American a year, that's pretty good. That's really good, right? I didn't even make that. I didn't even make half that much when I was a security guard in the 2 years I did that job, in Vancouver. Now with that being said, you can easily imagine why, like, it's a miracle I lasted for 2 years. One, I'm not dead, and two, I didn't quit earlier, right? Because like I made basically chump change in comparison. I'm like, are you for real? You made that? We made basically like almost $100,000 Canadian a year doing security. Like, okay, that almost makes security work worth it when you make that much. But I didn't make it. I didn't even make half that much in a year. I actually made probably, well, I'm exaggerating a bit. Where like, how much would 60,000? Well, of course you have to put taxes into consideration as well. But 60,000, I don't actually know how much that is in Canadian dollars. It's probably more closer to like 80,000, not quite 100,000, but it's like 80,000, I think, which is still a lot of money. $80,000 Canadian a year is quite a lot of money for doing security work, right? That almost makes it worth doing, right? Because like I didn't even make half that much. I was making like just over 30,000. I was making like 33,000 or something like that a year for security work. This full time, by the way. This is full time. Which, yeah, that's really low, right? Like, how much is that? An hour, that's like, well, you're making over 30,000. You're making basically like $18 to $20 maybe an hour, something like $18 an hour. That's a safe bet. When I'm making like 30 something thousand, which, yeah, that's way higher than the Canadian minimum wage, which is like $15 an hour. The idea is that if you work the Canadian minimum wage, you make 30,000 a year, which isn't very much, right? And of course, one of these things, even though I said we wouldn't talk about this, but like when people talk about like, oh, they need to bump up the wage, and I'm surprised none of the candidates at the election ever brought up bringing up the wages, but I don't think one. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other problems that you run into of why it's hard to raise up the minimum wage. But basically, if you work the minimum wage in Canada, and let's say you work 40 hours a week, and let's say you work 50 weeks of the year, you take 2 weeks off because you're more or less required to. So you would make just over $30,000, something like that, right? Let's do some math quick, just so I'm not like BSing you, right? So let's say you made the Canadian minimum wage, or at least in Vancouver, the minimum wage is $15.50, but we'll just say $15. So $15. Let's say you work 40 hours a week, which is a full-time job. Now that times 50, because you work 50 weeks in a year, and you make $30,000, right? That's 30,000 Canadian, which I know you Americans are probably scoffing at how low that is, right? Because the exchange is like, let's say it's like 1.7, right? So times, or 1.3, sorry. So it's like, let's say it's like 78, for every Canadian dollar is like 78 US cents. And so basically I basically made like just under 25,000 US, which is like, some of you are probably laughing. That's like a really low amount. And it is. And in my current job, I make the same amount, but in my current job, I don't do with a quarter, if not even, I don't deal with like a quarter of the stress, if like maybe less than that. I probably deal with like 1/10 of the stress, right? The stress in my current job is all like getting up early, which is, I mean, not that bad, right? Whereas like, when as a security guard, people pick fights. Uh, I've been knife attacked. Uh, I've had people throw death threats at me and stuff like that, right? And other things like that, right? All of that does not make, when you go through that kind of harassment all the time as a security guard and people hate you for existing because you're a security guard, you know, you realize that like $23,000 is like laughable, right? Like, come on, you gotta go through all that abuse. You gotta make way more than $23,000 US a year, right? So easy reason why I laugh. But I remember I was just talking with this guy, and we were just talking about like, I was like, wow, you make so much, right? Like, if he made 60,000 US and I was making like 20 something thousand, like he almost made triple of what I make, right? Which is just like, yeah, it's a good thing I left security work and did a simpler job, though, doesn't pay all that well. Because one, it's not full time. I'm trying to get more full time. It's not easy. I work like, you know, this is the problem I face in my current job is that teeter totter where they're like, you're above the part timer, but you're below the full timer, and they put you in, they keep you in that limbo, right? Because I don't know how it is in the States. I assume it's the same. But in Canada, if you work, I think it's 18 hours a week, that's a part time job. If you work 32 or more, that counts as a full time job. And so working like 25 hours a week, it's like that weird teeter totter, right? And so of course, you want to be full time because then you get like benefits and stuff like that, right? Because part timers don't get that. And so I'm like trying to find a way to be like, I want to be a more full time staff and like, be that over 32, one to get paid more and two to get benefits, right? And so, if only, right? But the funny thing is that like when I was doing security work and it was like getting paid that little, and then considering the amount of crap I had to go through, right? Like I think it's funny on hindsight about like, wow, I can't believe I did all that dumb crap for so little. And then all of you are probably saying like, wow, that's so sad, right? And so, not that to make this a pity party for me, but like, yeah, that was a real thing, right? Maybe in another stream where I feel like being a bit more of a downer, I'll tell you some security guard stories. Even though technically, well, because I no longer work there, it doesn't really matter as much. But like of course, one of the things is that like, you don't talk about your job, right? But I don't work there anymore, so I talk about what I want. And you can tell that from the tone of my voice, you know that I don't have a lot of nice things to say about it. But to be fair, it's not like I was treated very nicely, so it's just how it be, right? But that was kind of my life in the last couple of years, before the last year, I guess you could say. Because I left that job at the end of 2020, actually roughly the time that I had switched from Twitch to YouTube. A little bit after that, actually, I left the job. Because I left the job at the, like, near to, like, November. And there's a really crazy story behind why I actually left. But I'll tell that another time. I can't believe we're already, like, more than halfway through the stream time, and I've only told, like, two stories. So let's tell another one. Let's bring a more funny story. Talk about my current job. And this is more like just a conversation in my current job. I'm not going to tell you what it actually is. But in my current job, this happened like yesterday, actually. This happened yesterday. And it's one, I know some you guys that have been here long enough, you guys know what kind of story this is going to be. This is one of those I'm old stories. So here you go. You can laugh at me at an I'm old story today. So yesterday when I was at work, I was working with, we work in pairs. And so the person I was working with, we were talking about stuff, and I asked, like, oh, you're a student. And I was talking, like, oh, you're a student. She said, yeah, I'm a student. I go to this school, whatever. And then she was talking about, like, her commute from home to school. And then I learned that apparently we live really close to each other. Not only did we live really close to each other, we went to the same high school. But now you know where this is going, right? And I was like, oh, cool, you went to the same school as I did. What year did you graduate? Which was a stupid question for me to ask, now that I think on hindsight. And she was like, oh, I graduated in 2020. Dude, man, I felt so old. I'm like, oh. Like, you're working with a person that graduated high school in, like, last year. And I'm like, yeah, when I graduated high school, oh my goodness, the actual answer was 2006, by the way. That's how old I am. And for those of you wondering how old I am now, not like I haven't already said it. I think I've said it at some point on one of my videos or on stream or something. I've definitely probably brought it up in, like, a Heroes of Might and Magic video, which, by the way, you should check out Throwback Thursday, Heroes of Might and Magic 2. But, lordy, like, when she said that, I just felt so old. I was like, I can't believe it. It's so weird to think that, right? It's like, and how long ago I went to high school, right? Like, it's like, and then to make me feel even older, I was like, so by the time you actually, when you were early in high school, so when the person I was working with, when she was early in high school, I had already finished my master's degree. Like, think about that just think about that, right? Like, holy moly, like, that's when you're hanging around, you're around people way too young, right? That's when, and this is probably, like, it's one of those things where, and this is true on Discord. I hang out in, like, various communities on Discord, whatever, gamer communities in various fan bases, whatever. And it just, this theme of me being super old keeps coming up, right? Where, like, and a big part of it is where somebody will say, like, oh, they just finished high school or something. Like, dude, man, I finished and this makes me feel super old, right? It's like, I finished my master's years ago, and I'm still hanging around people and talking to people on Discord, whatever. That just finished high school. Like, that's such a weird thing. Like, of course, part of that is, like, I guess the inner youth pastor in me. And so, like, yeah, I mean, obviously that's the case when you're the youth pastor, right? Because, when I was a youth pastor, I had just finished seminary, and I'm, I'm pastoring high schoolers, right? So essentially, I'm hanging out with, people still in high school when I've been, for a while completed seminary, right? And I don't know, it's just it's one of those, and that's the other thing too, and it's one of those frustrations, especially as you get older, and especially in the church working world. And this might be one of the problems I'm having with finding actual church work, is that, like, okay, I want to be more like associate pastor. I don't want, please stop delegating me to youth pastor. I've been a youth pastor at 4 different churches. Please let me be associate or move up, right? I'm done with being the youth pastor. Because you think about that. I've done it at 4 different churches. Well, 3 different churches. One of them is not really a church, right? And so, at 3 different churches, I've been a youth pastor, right? And so, like, all of those times, I was at least in seminary. So, like, I started seminary in my mid-20s, right? And it's weird to think that, like, I started seminary almost a decade ago. Like, time is weird, right? So, I mean, we could do it. I mean, talk about time being weird as its own stream, right? And I did a little bit of that in my my podcast last week about wisdom, right? About how time and life experience that comes with it, right? And stuff like that. But it's just weird to think that, like, so in the thing with work yesterday, it just, like, it felt so weird, right? And then, of course, just to screw around with some of these guys, I would, like, bring up certain little neat facts to make them feel weird about how like things that they would find weird, right? So one thing I like to do at times, I would say like, and this was I did this a lot when I was in seminary, and when I was in seminary, transitioning stories now. I guess I'm gonna tell a different one essentially, but still about me being old man. But when I was starting out in seminary, so this was like I started in 2012, so like yeah, almost a decade ago. I started in 2012, and I was living in a dorm. Well, it was kind of like a weird in between because it's like a dorm for older students, but it's not like a typical dorm where there's a little bit more independence for the people that live there, whatever, right? So I was living in this dorm, but we'll call it a dorm, right? So I was living in this dorm, and I was being the graduate student or the guy doing his master's. I was obviously older than everyone else living there, and one of the funny things is that like some of these guys, they're like in their early 20s, they're like 20, 21, maybe. Most of them are like 20, right? A lot of these guys I was living with. And there was a guy, there were some of the guys there that really loved Taylor Swift. And to make them feel weird and also to kind of like make fun of myself for being old, I guess. But of course, you know, when I was 25, I wasn't, you know, obviously when you're 25, you don't think of yourself as an old man. But when I was 25, 24, 25, when I started seminary, and these guys, you know, 20-year-olds that like all love Taylor Swift, I'd always bring up. And this got more funny to mention as I got older. Because of course, like, you know, you meet like people even younger that are like Taylor Swift fans or whatever, right? And I would bring up that like, yeah, Taylor Swift and I are the same age. And then people would just be taken aback by that, like, what? Like, yeah, you know, Taylor Swift and I are the same age. She's born like 8 months after me or something. I think she's born like early 1989. I'm born in the middle of 88. So yeah, like Taylor Swift and I are basically more or less the same age. And some people would just be taken aback by that, right? That is weird. I mean, here's a story that made me feel like, oh my goodness, I'm old, and I was only in my late 20s at the time. I wasn't finished seminary yet. So when I was in seminary, well, I gotta explain a little bit first before I talk more about seminary stories. So when I went to seminary is just a fancy word for like a very particular religious school specializing in like pastoral training and all that stuff, right? That's what the seminary is. And so pastor school for layman's terms. So in the pastor school was connected to a university. So there's a university that has, you know, regular undergraduate courses like any other university. And then the seminary was attached to it, and it was its own thing doing pastoral school, right? So living at the school for a couple of years, and then this was like in my fourth, maybe probably my fourth year or something, maybe even my fifth year before I graduated, because I was in seminary for 5 years. To be fair, when you have to do a thesis, though, I'm surprised I did it as fast as I did, but that's because I really planned ahead when I did it. But anyway, besides the point. So this was like in my fourth, maybe fifth year, maybe my fifth year actually. And at the beginning of the second semester, which happens in like January, right? So this is actually close to me graduating. This was like when I graduated in 2017 from seminary. That's how old I am, right? So more of, haha, you're old. So anyway, it was the beginning of my final year. Or sorry, it was like halfway through my final year. And I was at the school, you know, just checking stuff out, and I remember that there's a book exchange, because of course, you know, a lot of undergraduates, they don't want to buy books directly from the bookstore. You can buy from, you know, students that have already taken the course at a discounted price. So there's a book exchange going on. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go drop by there. I'll hang out with some of these younger guys that I'm friends with, whatever, right? And go hang out. So I was hanging out. You know, I'm Rick. When you say stuff like that, It's like, you ever watching those TV shows when the guy's like, remind me not to ask after like a catastrophe has happened? That's basically what you're doing. The remind me not to ask. That's what you're doing with that comment. Because now I want to ask, but I won't. But by you saying that, you make me now want to ask it. So, but I guess we can skip the, how's it going? Because I can already gauge from your statement how it's going for you. So I'll just leave it alone. No, that's fine. I'll just keep telling my story then about how old I am, and something that made me feel super, super old. But before I do that, hey Rick, welcome to the stream. Anyway, so I'm going to this book exchange. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna hang out with people, right? Because there's people I'm friends with that are there. I'm gonna go hang out, say hi. So I'm hanging out at this book exchange, right? And there's all these people flooded around. And okay, so last week I go out. I buy me, the wife and the oldest, each a Cadillac. I don't know where you get that kind of money. A Cadillac Escalade. This Thursday, one of my servants scuffs the paint on mine while he's working on the grounds. Ooh, that is unfortunate. But the fact that you can buy that many Cadillacs, dude, man, like, I wish I had that kind of money. But anyway, of course, I made the servant go and clean the buff on the scuff on his own time after work, but still it was annoying. Well, problems I wish I had. Because the idea of having a servant, though, like, some poor guy in Canada. I mean, I still fired him when he was done. Oof. Oh. Could be a little bit more forgiving on that one. I mean, sure, obviously, like, cars are valuable, but it's still just stuff, and this guy's livelihood is dependent on you employing him, so that's an oof right there. Anyway, so I'll just go back to telling my old man story. So I was at this book exchange, and the book exchange's theme, though, apparently they had a theme for the book exchange, and the theme was Throwback Thursday. Throwback Thursday, my ass is basically what I was saying, right? Because like, what they consider Throwback Thursday is like, these songs are not that old that they were playing, right? They were playing like music from like maybe 5 years or something, like, if even 5 years, some of these songs are not that old, right? Like, dude, if you're like, a throwback has to be at least 10, in my mind, it has to be at least 10 years for it to be like a real throwback, right? Because 10 years, like a whole decade, is quite a length of time. And when you think of like 10 years, and we label decades, right? Like, for example, we're in the beginning of the 2020s, or the 90s, right? Like, a decade we label decades, right? And so I think a 10-year counts as a throwback. But anyway, that's besides the point. So they're doing this Throwback Thursday book exchange, and so I'm hanging out with people there. 60 is oldies, yeah, like the 1960s, or we talk about like 60 years as a whole, right? Because then, like, at that point you're senior, right? But in this quote unquote Throwback Thursday, I'm hanging out with people, and this song goes on. I think it's I'm trying to remember the song's name. Love Story by Taylor Swift comes on. Love Story by Taylor Swift comes on. And this song's playing, and while the song's playing, I hear this girl just say out loud, This was me in middle school." And when she said that, I just felt so old, because I was like, yeah. And I was still in university. Oh, that was just like an oof moment, right? Yeah, the 60s, yeah. And then a little 70s is oldies, but really 50, yeah, I mean, you keep going backward in time and it just keeps getting older and older, right? But like I would count like 90s as throwback. I think 90s is a fair, like that's 20 years, right? Well, almost 30 years even, right? From the 1990s. And so that counts as throwback. It's not an oldies, but it's definitely throwback material. Early 2000s constitutes as throwback. I think it's safe to say, right? Because, you have teenagers of, like, not, they were born when that stuff was around, right? In the 2000s. But, yeah, throwback is, that's true, Rick. Throwback is very different from, like, an oldies. I'm not talking about oldies. I'm just talking about a throwback. So, in my mind, 10 years is a throwback, right? Because it is quite a length of time. One of the things that irritates me is when people say, like, hey, Throwback Thursday, and it was like a year ago. I'm like, dude, that does not count. 10 years definitely counts. 1 year does not count as throwback, okay? So anyway, when that girl said that, like, the song Love Story was like her in middle school, and I assume she's like, what, a first year? I'm like, dude, I felt so old. I was like, and I was still in university. Because, like, in the past, this can't work now because I'm no longer in university of any sort. But I used to make a joke how, like, I could track Taylor Swift's entire career because when she started, I had started university, and then it just goes from there, right? So every song she made, I was still in university until recent years because I haven't been in university for like 5 years. So, but it's just one of those funny things where it's like, yeah, I'm that old, right? And it's one of those things where, like, once again, it's like time is weird, but like you're growing up and you listen to some people, their music, whatever, and they're like, oh, they're so much older than you, whatever, right? Those are adults, right? And then you get older, and then when you become a young adult yourself, at the same time you become a young adult, all these new aspiring singers and actors or whatever come out, right? And they start their careers, and then you have there's a group of celebrities, I guess we could say, that are the same age as you. And then now I'm at that point where it's like, oh, now I listen to some music and these people are a lot younger than me, quite a bit even, right? And so it's just one of those things. It's just like time is weird, right? Because some things have that static kind of element to them, right? How pop or music in general has like certain static elements to it. The people change, but the elements are still there. And then of course, as the new people come in, and then you have exceeded that age group, right? And so it's just one of those things that's just kind of weird to think about because time is weird, right? You have never heard a Taylor Swift song unless it was on a commercial or something. Well, to be fair, most of it is like not that good. Britney Spears songs, you've only heard 2 Britney Spears songs. One of those things. This is where, like, once again, because Britney Spears was big when I was a kid. So, as a kid, you can't really appreciate some like 90s pop music. Of course, based on your statement about not listening to stuff after 1985, you're obviously not going to think the same thing I do. But when I look back and like listen to some 90s music and listen to it now as an adult, I actually really like a lot of it. There's quite a bit of it that is pretty good for like 90s pop music. It was good I'm sure it was good at the time, and it still has like a nostalgia feeling. I think that's part of it too. It's like a nostalgia feeling. So like I like 90s music because that was a big, like, I grew up in the 90s, right? And so listening to it now as an adult, it's like, oh, I actually like this stuff. And some of it anyway, right? But I mean, there's music nowadays that I like as well. So I mean, I'd like to keep my mind open about what the kinds of music I listen to. And I listen to all kinds of stuff. Have you ever listened to music from the 70s? Yeah, because obviously my dad loved the 70s. And so I listen to some of the stuff that he listens to. I wouldn't say, like, once again, for me, the 90s is more nostalgia for me, right? Because that's where, like, I was alive during that time, and I was alive when these things were, like, the hit, right? So 90s I have a closer connection to. But I have listened to some 70s music, and I do like it. I mean, it is pretty good. And then there's some stuff nowadays that's pretty good. But the problem is, like, I can see where, like, someone, where you might say, Rick, that, like, oh, music nowadays is bad or something. And I can see why you would say that, right? Because the idea is it's harder to find good stuff now than it was in, like, the 90s, and I'm pretty sure in the 70s, right? Like, in the 90s, I would say that was actually, a lot of it's pretty good. Sure, there's a lot of crappy stuff in the 90s too, but I mean, every era has its crappy music as well. So, but the scaling of what is really good and what's really bad, you know, music nowadays, and of course, someone was probably going to contest me, um, and say, "Oh, you're wrong, Michael, about, like, music nowadays." Where, like, I would say it's a lot harder to find good stuff nowadays versus, like, the 90s or even the 70s, right? And so, you don't consider rap to be music? Well, depends on in my mind, it depends who the rapper is, because there's a difference between, like, some guys who actually, like, how do I put it? So some rap music, I'm gonna use the bad example first. Some rap music has a guy mostly talk his songs, and it just has, like, the funky beats and all that. That part, like, that's not really rapping. You're, like, you're talking your songs with, like, the cool beat, right? That's a lot of that was a lot of, like, modern rappers, right? They just kind of talk their songs with the cool beats in the background, and they don't rap, right? But when you have actual rapping where it's, like, the fast poetic talk with their music, some of that is really good. Depends on but of course the problem with rap music compared to other music is rap music can only be carried by the skill of the rapper. Essentially, with rap music, it's all about the rapper, right? If he can't do the super fast poetic talk, then then the rap's not good, right? Whereas other music, it doesn't have to just, like, the lyrics don't carry other music, right? And so you think of, like, a lot of pop songs, the lyrics don't have to carry the music. What makes pop songs so good, at least in my mind, I like a lot of pop, actually. I don't say I like pop as a whole, because 20 the last decade's pop has been kind of pretty bad. But like 90s pop, the thing about 90s pop wasn't about the lyrics, even though some of it is actually pretty good. I have a question for you, though. Can you recite the lyrics to a rap song? Well, not by memory. So, because I don't listen to enough rap. But once again, that's where I would go back to the whole, like, once again, rap is all about the lyrical skill of the rapper, right? Versus, like, I'll use a pop song as a counter example. So what makes pop songs so fun to listen to, and that's the main thing about pop songs. Pop songs are fun to listen to. They get you in a mood to, if you're, like, the dancing type, it gets you in a mood to dance, right? And it makes you feel, like, energized. It makes you feel good, right? You want to do a little jiggy with a pop song, right? And this pop song makes you feel it's fun to listen to. And that's probably why I like pop, actually, is because it has that, like, fun feeling, You feel like you're having a good time, right? When you listen to pop music. At least good pop music, right? Should make you feel like you're having a good time. And so you think of, like, why the boy bands and the girl groups in the 90s were as popular as they were. That's the problem. I don't think anybody can recite them. If it was music, it would have words that can be remembered. Well, that depends on what kind of fans you're talking about, right? Because, like, okay, I can recite some NSYNC because I actually listen to that stuff, and most of you say, oh, NSYNC's terrible, right? But hey, Justin Timberlake was popular for a reason. But, like, well, that's all perspective, Rick. Once again, there is some good rap out there, take that with a grain of salt, because obviously your opinion and my opinion will be different based on like, when I talk about rap, I talk about music after 1985. So there's that. But bad music can be remembered. Well, I mean, once again, this is where, like, once again, I like pop, because even if it's not the best song, what makes pop popular, is that it's fun to listen to, right? And so you remember it because usually you remember pop music because of the beat, right? And the beat is really fun to listen to. And so, and then that's how they get you, right? That's how pop music gets you, right? Because the beat is easy to remember, and then it's like it makes you feel good, and that's why people listen to pop music. Okay, well, but I mean, so you're saying that it's not music? Okay, that's fine too. But I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would disagree. I'm not a huge rap fan, so I'm not gonna speak on behalf of rap fans. But I'm pretty sure they may think that, like, no, rap is like amazing music, whatever. I mean, I don't care much for rap. I don't listen to much rap. Like I said, I mostly listen to like a lot of pop music. I listen to a fair amount of soft rock. I listen to music that basically makes you feel good when you're listening to it, right? That's why pop is, that's why I like pop, right? Because it's fun to listen to. Not that, like, and then of course, like, like 70s rock is actually pretty good. And then like soft rock variations from, like, when stuff in like the early 2000s tried to replicate 70s rock, and then they called it soft rock. That stuff I actually like as well. But yeah, with music, it's one of those things. And of course, the other thing too is that, like, depends on your musical skill, right? Because some people would be like, how people define, musical skill or whatever, right? I'm not one exactly high in musical skill. I mean, sure, I played like piano growing up. How much of that I've retained is the real question. But enjoyed talking to you. Gotta run for a bit. Hey, yeah, thanks for dropping by though, Rick. It's great to have you, and we can talk about things like music. Because, the first part was a joke. Oh, if you say so. Oh, that's the thing of, I like to think I'm a trusting person, and like what you say is I have to take that as truth. I have to take that as like at face value, right? Which, you know what? Next week, you have inspired me to do what I'm going to do for next week's stream, next week's podcast, and it's going to be a funny topic as well. But today, I'm just going to tell another story before we end the stream. So, but thanks for dropping by, Rick. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, but you pegged it as me trying to ask you what happened. Well, it's because, like, once again, it's that whole. You ever seen that TV trope about, the don't remind me not to ask, and it's basically the Pandora's box thing, right? Like, or the red button motif, right? The traditional version is called the Pandora's box. The modern person might call it the red button motif. And of course, that is, the red button motif is there's a big red button, and it says don't press the red button. But of course, you want to press the red button, right? that's kind of, I mean, that's just a part of human psychology, right? And it's been ingrained in us since like the dawn of time, but because human beings are like that, right? It's part of the human nature. It's that, this people may say curiosity killed the cat, but it's definitely not the cat that's gonna get killed by it, right? As a matter of fact, it's one of those funny things where, like, cats are actually not curious. So it's weird that that statement even exists, because cats are very cautious, right? Humans, on the other hand, are not cautious, right? The humans are far more curious, right? There's something of mystery, they'll engage it. I mean, that's the premise of every, you know, psychological horror. Like the Stanley Parable. Yeah, the Stanley Parable is the same thing. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's the Stanley Parable is a old book from, oh, I don't remember what decade it was. It's an old book, and basically it's the same thing. But of course, the archetype would be called the Pandora's Box. Right? Have you ever played the Stanley Parable? No, I haven't. Isn't the Stanley Parable an old book? I think it's an old. Like the principle's the same, and it's like an old book, I think. No, you're talking about the game. Well, I've never heard of the game, the Stanley Principle. So no, I don't know the game. All right, you're gonna run. All right, you have a good day then. And thanks for dropping by. Anyway, so I'll tell one more story, and then we're gonna end the stream because it's already 5:20, and you know, fun chats like this, it makes the time go by pretty quick. How's the old saying go? You know, time flies when you're having a good time. But anyway, so I'll tell one more story. Not so much about me being old, although that's definitely gonna come up. But this was, I was going to tell the story about how I got this picture in the background here. I'm going to bring out the picture and I'm going to put it in front of my face here. So let's just move it like this. And yeah, that's real high editing skills right there, right? But you're probably wondering what's up with this picture, and I use it as my thumbnail for like everything, right? Honestly, I need to pay someone to make me a real like thumbnail and a real like backdrop, and modify how my you know, the setup of the screen, right? I should change that setup. I should probably hire someone. I'm thinking of getting Talkie to do it. If you guys remember Talkie, holy crap! This is how time is weird, right? So Talkie was on this channel almost a year ago when we were doing that Halloween, still not finished to this day, Silent Hill 4 playthrough. Well, here's a little bit of a, you know, news for you guys, and you guys can look forward to this. I'm gonna have Talkie on the channel again on a podcast, and you know, those of you that are here because of Talkie, and I haven't done anything with that guy for a long time because, you know, he was busy with school. He was finishing his undergrad, and so he never had time. And but in October, I need to confirm the date with Talkie first. It might either be the 4th or the 11th on Thanksgiving Day. Probably the 4th though, but don't quote me on that quite yet, because I need to actually finalize a date with him. So yeah, Talkie's gonna be back on here, and for those of you that are, you know, you like Talkie's content, you know, you can definitely hang out with him and me. When we do it, I'm gonna do a podcast. I'm gonna do one of these podcast episodes with him, and we're gonna have a grand old time. So, anyway, side that shameless advertising tangent. But anyway, this picture. So the reason why I brought the Talkie thing is because I'm probably gonna pay Talkie to make me an actual thumbnail and an actual like setup, like a proper image to use for the image aspect of the screen. But side note aside, I'm going to talk a bit about this picture. Now, this picture was actually a picture from 2 years ago. See, this is how, like, time is weird. Almost 2 years ago, I went to Japan, and the bulk of why we were there was actually because my nephew, well, one of my well, more like a distant nephew, is more like my cousin's son was born. So my cousin had a baby in Japan. And so we went to Japan to, you know, meet the baby, right? And this was before COVID was a thing, right? This is actually like that weird twilight time, because like word of COVID came up during this time when I was in Japan, when I went to Japan. Word of COVID, like COVID was in, like the word was around, but it hadn't become the pandemic that it is now. But anyway, so I was in Japan, and we were in a small town because that's where my cousin's wife, so my cousin-in-law, I guess you could say, my cousin-in-law is from this town called Tokushima. Now, Tokushima is a smaller town. Can't remember where exactly in Japan it is. Somewhere in the southern part of Japan. And we were in Tokushima for like 2 weeks, which, you know, it's one of those things that on hindsight, I kind of wish that like we had planned our vacation better. And as much as hanging around with the baby for like 2 weeks is great, we should have spent way more time in Tokyo because Tokyo's like, you know, Tokyo. But anyway, that's besides the point. So in Tokushima, I was like, dude, man, we gotta do more tourist stuff. Because as far as like, you know, a lot of the time we spent in Tokushima, it was mostly like just hanging out with my cousin's family. You know, or rather my cousin-in-law's family. And so, but the problem is Tokushima is a town. It's not like it's not Tokyo, right? Like, Tokyo has so much stuff in it. You can do all kinds of cool shit in Tokyo. Not in Tokushima though. Tokushima is a pretty small place. But when we first entered Tokushima, I saw this big ad, like a big poster, for this anime bar. And I was like to my other cousin who was traveling with me at the time, my other cousin. I was like, "Yo, dude, we gotta check out this anime bar. We gotta check. Like, there's not a lot to do in Tokushima, but there's this anime bar, and we gotta check it out." So we went to this anime bar, and you know that's where all the pictures in the background from various animes. You can't see in the picture very well, but in the top part behind my head there, I'm trying to point to it there, right? So behind my head there is a bunch of anime figures. There's like a whole bunch further on my left there, but you can't see it because obviously the picture is more about with me and this plush. And this plush is from, I can't remember, it's from Fate. Can't remember which Fate because I actually never watched it. I just know a fair amount of the Fate series because of course, you know, FGO is a thing. And so like a lot of the kids play FGO, right? And so I kind of like get a little like I have an idea what FGO is, but I don't actually know a lot about it. But anyway, this is character, and I saw this plush, and like this plush is awesome. So I gotta have a picture with this plush, and so that's what this picture is. And so it's me at this anime bar, and the funny thing is my cousin's camera did a lot of cool artificial lighting, because inside the bar did not look like this. Inside the bar was way darker than this, if memory serves, but yeah, so that's the story behind. So we took a picture there, and the character I'm holding, I can't remember her name, but basically it's the whole like anime trope of the little girl with the giant weapon. So, you know, that's a funny thing in animes, right? They like to have the, you know, the mini powerhouse, right? So the little girl that's like usually has like the ridiculous superpower. In this case, you know, the little girl with the giant axe, right? And there's quite a few of them, right? I mean, Mamori from Tokyo Mirage is one such character, right? She's part of that archetype. Whoops. No. No, what am I doing? No. Oh, now I revealed something to you. How I do the background music. Which I guess will be the last story that I tell you before we end the stream. So, I might as well even turn it up now because we're ending the stream pretty soon. So, the little trick I do for background music is I don't play like a Spotify list or a YouTube chant or a YouTube playlist or something in the background of these things. The real reason why I don't, because I don't mind talking over music when I do like the podcast and stuff like that. Well, in a podcast, you kind of don't want the music to distract you, right? But like, for example, in the Bible reading streams or stuff like that, I don't play music in the background. And the real reason why I don't is not so much because I wanted to be quiet and have awkward silence moments, but rather it's actually because of copyright claims. And so the idea is I want to avoid that as much as possible, especially for those of you who remember my Bravely Default series. You guys know I ran into quite a bit of copyright claim, even though I was like playing directly off my Switch. But basically the idea is to avoid copyright claims. So what I do is I actually just play my Switch in the background and let music from various games. And as you notice, I've used Tokyo Mirage all 3 times. Well, no, I used it for 2 of them. The first one I used Mario & Rabbids. So I just use like game music and let it play in the background. So that I don't have to use like a YouTube link or something. Because if you do that, then YouTube immediately detects it. It will immediately detect that I'm using another YouTube video in my own YouTube video. So that's another reason where like when I refer to stuff like movie scenes or whatever, I don't actually play the movie scenes or whatever. Because then I would have to use YouTube, and then like YouTube will do a claim on that and all kinds of things like that, right? So that's the little secret behind that. So I showed you a little bit behind the curtain there, figuratively and literally. But yeah, that's gonna be it for story time. So now I've told you the story of where I got my name, the thumbnail, some other stuff about my life, and yeah, there is an hour and a half of just us talking nonsense because, you know, you need time like this just to talk about random stuff, and I'm really sorry for that background noise. So I'm just gonna mute the mic for a second here. Okay, that's good enough. Alright, so I've told the story about that thing so many times I don't think I have to tell it again. So anyway, I've that as I was saying, you know, sometimes you just need like mindless streams like this. Just us talking about gibberish and me laughing at myself, you laughing at me, having Rick hang out and talk about him being an even older guy. So see, now I don't feel as old because Rick is here like being a super old guy. So thank you for that. But anyway, yeah. So sometimes you just need that, right? You just need to get your mind off everything that's going on in the world right now and just talk dumb crap with your friends and in a community or whatever. Just do something else, right? Anyway, I'm gonna end the stream, but before that, we're gonna actually do a bit of housekeeping. So the first thing that I need to let you guys know is this week will continue as normal. I don't think I'm gonna stream on Wednesday. Probably not, because I work in the morning, and then by the time I come home, I like to take a nap, and so that nap might overlap when I would stream. Because, dude, man, I get so tired. It's part of me being old, I know. But like when you wake up super early to work and then you come home at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you're like, I just want to sleep. I don't want to stream right. So that will probably be what happens on Wednesday. So the rest of the week is probably the regular thing, right? So Thursday, we'll be doing our Throwback Thursday of Heroes Might Magic 2. And then Friday will be our reading stream. We are in part 3 of our reading through the Book of Kings. So that's how the rest of the week is going to look like. Next week's podcast will... I was inspired by something we talked about today between Rick and my banter that we were having. And I have a topic pretty much ready for next week now. I just need to prep some stuff for it. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. We'll be doing that next week. And then, as I've already hinted, in the future we're going to have our first guest on the podcast, who will be Taki. And you know, Taki's a buddy of mine. We did that not completed Silent Hill 4, and you know, maybe in the future we'll do something, Taki and I will do something on Halloween. I'll have to talk about it. It'd be pretty hard though, because of course, you know, he's getting full-time work and stuff like that, so it's one of those things that like as you start doing full-time work and you get older and stuff like that, you can't really do stuff like streaming. Like the fact that I do what I do, even though it's not all that much, it still is a lot of time, right, to take out of your week to do like a couple of hours of streaming. It's weird to think that, but it's just kind of how it'd be, right? But anyway, so yeah, that's basically how these streams are going to be for the next little while. With that said, this is going to be the end of the stream. You guys enjoyed this podcast of just silly stories with me, just talking dumb crap. And I will see you guys on Thursday for some Heroes of Might and Magic 2. So, you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you Thursday. And God bless you.